Good morning and welcome back to Aruba ClearPass and AOS8 integration video series. Today we are going to do the first use case number 1, which is Aruba AOS8 Wi-Fi with ClearPass for AO2.1 PEAP authentication workflow. Alright, so let's see what we are using in our lab. Now in our lab, basically, the main component we have will be the VMM, VMC, and ClearPass. For VMM and VMC, we are using the version 8606, and for CPPM, ClearPass, we are using the version 6.9.3. This is a physical network diagram just for your reference. Logical network diagram to show layer 2 and layer 3 connectivity. So basically for each group, we will have two CPPM, CPPM1 and CPPM2. It's already been configured, basic configuration, and form a cluster. One VMM, same, already been configured with the basic configuration, and two VMC with the basic configuration. And for each group, you have one jump host, right? So there will be 6 jump hosts here. Each of the SE, you need to RDP into your jump host after you've already configured the IPsec VPN to access to the lab. Beside the ClearPass, VMM, VMC, for each group you will have one AP also, and the AP already been configured to associate and under managed by VMC1 and 2. The below are 7 SSID that will be configured in the lab. Okay, so for the use case number 1, we will create two SSID. The first SSID is GRP X. Remember, X is your group ID. WP-WPA2-Enterprise and GRPX-WPA3-Enterprise. So we will try to configure the WPA2 and WPA3, right? The VLAN ID of each of this SSID per group will be 290H, so please make sure that you use your correct VLAN ID. The subnet for the VLAN 290H will be 172.25.h.0/24. Gateway is .254 and already been configured on the core switch. So you just need to point to this gateway, then you have the internet connectivity. The DNS server will be 192.168.1.11 and 192.168.1.12. In our lab, we could use this DNS server and 172.25.29.42. Okay, so let's copy and paste here. All right, so this will be the DNS server we will use in the lab. The DHCP range of this subnet 172.25.h.24 already been configured on the AD server. So you don't need to configure DHCP server, and it's already been there and ready to use. So for the use case number 1, basically these are the tasks that you need to do on the VMN and on the ClearPass. From the VMM, these are the steps need to be done. So first of all, you need to check your VMM configuration. If you already seen a lot of configuration already been there, you know, like the group, the web, the SSID, it means that that one is the old setting. So you need to restore the VMM and VMC back to initial configuration. This one I will show the detail in later video, right? And after that, we will need to configure to form VMC1 and VMC2 to form a cluster, and followed by config we will configure the Redis server group, user role, AAA profile, SSID profile, VLAN ID, VLAN mapping, virtual AP profile, AP group, and assign the web profile to AP group. So if you notice, right, the order of the configuration, it it have it makes sense here. So because of in AOS8, right, the configuration will follow the tree. It means the profile. It means that before you can configure before you can assign the web profile to AP group, you need to have the AP group. So that's why you have to do the AP group first, right? And again, before you have the web profile, you need to configure web profile, virtual AP profile. And before you can configure web profile, you need to have the VLAN ID and VLAN mapping, and SSID and AAA profile, right? And again, before configure AAA profile, you need to have the user role configured, and you need to have the Radius server group configured. And before configure Radius server group, you need to have the Radius server configured, right? So it follow the hierarchical configuration. So make sure we follow this one. For the ClearPass step, right? Basically, we need to restore the ClearPass to the initial configuration if you see the ClearPass already been configured, right? By the previous engineer from the previous session. And we need to configure the first step. We need to configure the ClearPass virtual IP, and then we configure the VMC1 and VMC2 as the Raiders client. And follow that, we will use the configuration wizard to configure the enforcement profile, enforcement policy, and role mapping. And after that, we will do some fine tuning in the configuration from the ClearPass. And of course, the last step, we will just connect the Windows 10 Wi-Fi into this new SSID and do the testing. All right, so let's go to the detail. Now, the IP address for your each group equal of the it will be 172.25 and followed by your group ID. So in my case, my group ID will be number 8, so I will use 172.25.8.58. If you curious don't know the detail, you can go back to the logical network diagram. So from here you will see the detailed IP address of the CPPM, as you can see from here, right? 61. The VMM will be .58. Okay, so login with the username admin and password is Aruba at 123. Remember, A is capital. Okay, now we are in. So when you are logged into your VMM, you will see your VMC is already been configured and joined to this VMM. And you have one AP under managed by this VMM also. Okay, so let's move to the first one, restore the VMM VMC initial configuration. So in fact, right, this is the correct configuration, so we don't need to do anything. But just in case, if you need to restore, you go to here, click to the VMM, under the maintenance, configuration management, right? And from here, you can do the restore, right? But of course, before you do the restore, you can just make sure that under the VMM, there will be the flash backup already been there. In fact, I already do the flash backup. So you just press restore to restore it to the initial configuration. Okay, so let's move to this one, how to configure VMC1 and VMC2 cluster. Okay, so to configure the cluster, we need to go to this folder level, right? So for those who don't know how to create the folder level, uh, you go to under the under the manage network, you can click the plus sign here to be able to create the so-called the folder, right? So you can or we call group, right? You can go here and create, let's say I create a test group here. So when you create the test group here, then you can move the controller or the MC or VMC into the the folder, right? So recommendation, the folder, it will represent the physical location of the VM or VMC or MC. So it means in this case, I have VMC1 and VMC2 sitting on the same so-called LAN room or server room, and it share the same set of L2 network, same set of VLANs, right? And I plan to configure these two VMC to form a cluster. So I assign under the this folder called LAN cluster. So to configure cluster, I go to this folder level, go to the configuration, and go to services. So the first step to configure cluster, you have to create the cluster profile. I name it LAN cluster. Submit and apply the change. All right. So after you submit, apply the change, you see you have the cluster profile called LAN cluster. So next step, you need to add the controller into, I mean the VMC1 and VMC2 into this cluster profile. So IP address .8.51 is a VMC1 measurement IP address. Now in the cluster setting, you need to assign the VRRP IP address for the cluster member. Right? The reason is in the cluster, it the 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 controller will use the VRP IP for the radius COA purpose. Right? The reason is in the cluster, the AP and the client will be load balanced between among the cluster member. I mean the VMC or MC member. So the client can be freely fail over, between the cluster member if one of um, the VMC or MC in the cluster is down. So when that one happen, the radius server, if it in this case, for example, the ClearPass, if it want to do the COA, it just leverage on the it will just issue the COA, the radius COA to this VRP IP instead of the physical IP, right? So it means that when the VMC is down, another VMC in the cluster will take care of this VRP IP. So the ClearPass can issue the COA successfully even the controller is down. All right, so what could be the IP address of this VRP you need to configure? Basically, it need to be the same subnet with the measurement IP, which is same subnet with 172.25.8. something, right? So let's see what could be the VMC1 VRP IP COA. Look at the virtual logical network diagram. We look at the VMC1, and you see the VRRP COA IP is 53. So we configure 172.25.8.53. VRP VLAN is a measurement VLAN 2908. Right, so the rest other setting leave it default. The wrap public IP is for the use case where we configure the controller cluster for the wrap termination. Right, in this case, we will not use it because we use for CAP, campus IP. Repeat the same step to add the second controller into the cluster profile. VRP IP, let's check. For second controller will be VRP 08.54. Okay. 172.25.8.54. VLAN 2908. Okay. Right, so by default, it will use the VLAN 250 as the initial VRP ID. But in some case, if you worried that, or you already noticed that the VLAN ID 250 already been used by other call switch in that same VLAN, then you can specify a new VLAN ID for VRP IP here, right? But in this case, I just leave it default. VRP passphrase is for the VRP share key. I just leave it blank. Advanced, nothing to change here. Just leave it by default. Okay. All right. Accidentally go to advanced, then I need to reconfigure this. 172.25.8.53. Okay. Then 172.25.8.54. Submit. Apply the configuration. Okay, so after you done this step, The next step is that you need to assign the VMC into the cluster profile you just created. So to assign, you have to go to the node level, choose under the services, under the cluster group membership, choose the LAN cluster profile. Right. Now, when we configure the cluster for the AOS8, we have to make sure that we always make sure the cluster member form the layer 2 cluster, but not the layer 3 cluster. So to form the layer 2 cluster, all the cluster member, it will do the heartbeat on all the uplink VLAN to check if it can reach the member through all the VLANs. So if there are the VLAN that it cannot reach, any VLAN if it cannot reach the member, then the cluster member, it will assume that they don't have the full L2 connectivity of all the L2 of all the cluster member, and then it will fall back to L3 cluster which is it will lost, it will we will miss few key feature, right? For example, the seamlessly failover live upgrade, those features will not be supported in L3 cluster. So make sure that if you know there's a VLAN that you do not enable on the uplink or do not enable on the call switch, right? So make sure that those VLAN you need to exclude from from the cluster checking. So in this case, for example, I just remove the VLAN 1 because of this VLAN I will not use, right? So just leave the VLAN 2908, submit. I do the same for the second VMC2, right? Second controller, assign as VLAN 1, and then apply. So that's it. So after I done that one, I would expect the VMC1 and VMC2 form the cluster. So to do a quick check, I will just open the SSH session to VMC1 and VMC2 and check. Second one, T2. Okay. Now let's check the first one. The command to check is show LC cluster group membership. Now you notice, right? It have to be the L2 connected. Okay, so if you see the L3 connected, it could be the VLAN are not been synced between two controller, or it got the blocked by the uplink port or uplink switch. So you can check that by show LC cluster VLAN probe, right? Status, enter. So if there are the failed VLAN, it will show here, right? Do the same for the second controller. Show LC cluster group membership. Great. So both controller already form cluster and they are at L2 connected. Okay. Now let's move to the next step, which is configure Raider server and Raider server group. Now in this case, we will configure under the folder level. So when we configure under this level, it will be pushed down into both controller, right? So it's always best practice to do at the group level for the configuration that will be shared by the member. Now to configure Raider server and Raider server group, go to authentication. Under all servers, you will see here all servers. So click here to create the server group. Choose type is radius. We can name it like CPPM1. IP address. Now let's take a look at the logical network diagram. So CPPM1 will be 172.25.8.61. Okay, 172.25.8.61. Submit. So CPPM2 will be CPPM2 172.25.8.62. And we also have one more IP address, which is a virtual IP address above ClearPass, which is .69. We can add it in this list also. CPPM VIP 172.25.8.69. All right. Now take note when you add the Raider server, you have to make sure that you go to the Redis server to configure the share key. If you don't do that, it will use the default share key. Then it will not match the share key you configure under the ClearPass in next step. So we will just do Aruba at 123, A capital, Aruba at 123. Submit. Do the same for CPPM2, Aruba at 123, Aruba at 123. Submit. And the third one, Aruba at 123, at 123. Okay. Apply the change. All right. Now, next step, we need to configure the COA server also. Click here and choose the dynamic authorization. We need to configure the ClearPass as the COA client, right? So we just configure this with the IP address of the first ClearPass 172.25.8.61. Same for the second ClearPass 172.25.8.62 and 172.25.8.69. Again, same step, right? You need to click into this um, COA client or RFC 3576 to define the key. Basically, we use the same key as we configure under the Redis server. Aruba at 123. Aruba at 123. Second, Aruba at 123. Aruba at 123. And the last one, Aruba at 123. Aruba at 123. Submit changes. Okay, so we have done creating 3 Redis server and 3 COA client. Okay, we need to go here and create the server group. So we go here and just name it CPPM uh, GRP radius. And we go here and add the CPPM1 back here, add CPPM2, go here and add VIP into this server group. Apply the change. Okay, so we should move the VIP into the first. Okay. All right, so we have done in configuration, configuring the 3 CPPM, the 3 Redis server and 3 IFC 3576. We also need to do the quick check, right, to make sure that the configuration is applied. Push down to VMC. Go to VMC and show AAA radius. Sorry, AAA authentication server radius. So we see these are the 3 RAID server we configure. We can go to particular CPPM. Let's say go to CPPM 1. We see this configuration. Now, you can't see the key in this case because by default, the VMC will encrypt the key. So to temporarily see the key, you can give the command encrypt disable and show again. Now you see the key you configure here, right? Just for troubleshooting purpose, check second one, check third one, and we also can check show AAA authenticate RFC. Sorry, show AAA RFC server 172.25.8.61. Okay, key correct 62 and 69. Okay, encryption enable. All right, let's move to the next step. So we done this one. We create the user role. All right. So in this case, we will go into role and policy. Please take note, we are still under the LAN cluster folder level. Now let's create a new role for this one. So this new role, we will call it In this case, we will do it. We will just do it by SSID, right? So we just create two row. We call it GRP 8, or we just do simple like okay, we just do this one. This is your own reference, okay? First one and second row, W3 enterprise. All right, then we go to this one. So basically, we just allow any, add existing policy. We choose policy allow all, submit. Do the same for group 8 WB3 enterprise. Go to here, click add an existing policy, allow all, submit, and apply the changes. Done. So we already finished two row for two SSID configuration. All right. Um, Now we need to move to next step to configure AAA profile. We go to authentication, AAA profile is here, right? This is the .1x SSID, so we go to here .1x and we can submit as, and we will rename it. We will rename it AAA WPA2 Enterprise. Okay. Now for .1x authentication, by default, it will after the user authenticates successfully, it will assign to so-called authenticated row. But to make it easier for us to monitor later, we will use the row called WP2 Enterprise for this. Okay, and under the we will turn on the radius roaming accounting and interim accounting. Right, and then we will submit under AAA L2.1x authentication. This one we can leave it by default. We don't need to change this setting. Triple L2.1x authentication server group. Now we need to choose the server group we just created in the previous step. Submit. Mac authentication. We do not need to enable. We we configure the accounting server. Just configure this ClearPass group as a Raiders accounting, and we add the ClearPass as the RFC 3576 into this list. Submit and apply the change. So we have just have completed create the AAA profile for the first SSID, right? So now we create the second one by submit as, and we just rename this one AAA WPA3 Enterprise. Save. So we need to change the row from WP2 to WP3 for this new profile. Other setting, we just leave it there, right? No changes required. Apply the change. Okay, so we have completed configuration, right, for AAA profile. The next, we need to create the SSID profile. Okay, so to create the SSID profile, you can go to the system, go to profile, right? For some of you, if you don't see the profile or for some reason, right, if you can't see the profile, you can go here and just click show advanced profile. Okay, and the SSID profile is under the SSID tab here, right? So you just click here to create the new SSID profile. I will name it SSID WPA2 Enterprise. Okay, so ESSID, it could be the SSID it will broadcast by IP later. So we need to configure in correct name. So it could be the group 8 WPA2 Enterprise. So group 8 GRP8, right? And because of this WPA2 Enterprise, so I will choose the WPA2 AES and submit. Push down the config to the VMC. Okay, so go back and check the SSID setting. Okay, so this is the default configuration, default setting of this SSID. Normally, when you do the configuration, you should do some fine tuning. So if you know that this is the Wi-Fi configuration for Office network, so you can do some fine tuning here. For example, for basic rate, instead you leave it at 6, which is the lowest rate, you can move to 12 and 24. And then the transmit rate, you remove all the slower rate, put it 12 and 24. So this setting can be is recommended for the office deployment where you have the AP to AP distance is about 15 meters or less. For G 2.4 radio, you can remove 1 and 2, and you can, to be safe, you can put it 6 or you can move to 12, right? So for me, normally I will put 6, and then you can remove the slow rate, apply the chain. So the other setting, just leave it by default, right? And apply the chain. Okay, so basically you already have the AAA profile configured, and you already have the SSID profile configured. Oh, I forgot one thing. We just create the profile for PEAP2, so we have to create another one. We call it SSID WP3 ENT. So you notice that I just use the current profile and then I just save as to have a new profile. And then I change the name here, ESSID. The rest of other setting, it will be copy from the old profile, right? Apply, change. Okay, so now we already have two SSID and two AAA profile. We can configure the VLAN ID and VLAN mapping. So VLAN ID and VLAN mapping will be can be configured under the interfaces. Right, so down here, VLANs, you can create the VLAN. We call it is a V2908. Right, VLAN is 2908. Submit, apply. So this will be the VLAN we use. If you don't know what is VLAN, is over here. It will VLAN we will use for these two SSID. Okay, so VLAN 298 is here. If we go down to this level, we will see that it pushed down to the VMC. Alright, so we done this one. We move to the next step to create the VAP profile. Now again, VAP profile, you go back to the system, go to profile, wireless LAN, go all the way down, and it's under virtual AP. Click to create a new one. I will just name it web WPA WPA2 ENT. Now this VLAN is the one we just created, V2908. This is the VLAN mapping, VLAN name. Leave it default for other setting. Okay. Now go to this web you just created and you assign AAA profile. Go to here and assign WPA AAA WP2 enterprise we just created in the previous step. Do the same for SSID WPA2 enterprise SSID setting. Submit. Push down. Okay, so we just created the web for the first SSID, right? Let's see. Now we will need to create the web for the second SSID WPA3 enterprise. Submit as, name it web WPA3 ENT. Save. Okay, so the difference for this web, because we copy from the WPA2 enterprise, so we need to change the AAA this one to WPA3, and we change the SSID to WPA3 enterprise. The rest other setting we leave it by default. Push down the configuration. Okay, now the last step in this one is that double check again, right? So basically we already have the configuration for this web, right? So the next step is to configure AP group to be able to accept the web into AP group. So down here, just create a new AP group. We we can name it like LAN. Okay, apply the change. And under this AP group, you can assign the wireless LAN, I mean the web profile. Okay, here and here. These two web profile we just created. Push down. Okay. Now we need to do some fine tuning also, right? Take note that if you don't see the profile setting here, you can go to admin preference and turn on the show advanced profile. Go to profile. Now there are some fine tuning we need to do here, right? The first of all is a QoS setting. Um, we should turn on the fair access. So this one it means that the AP will give the same airtime for the old and the new client, so that the new client will not be slowed down by the old client. So we just call it fair access. Submit. Okay, and then apply this profile to um, 5 gig radio. We do the same for 2.4 gig radio. Okay, under the RF management, this is the default setting. So most of the case, these settings are fine for the office environment, right? But some use for some cases, right? I want to limit the 2.4 into 6 and 9. But of course, make sure you do done the proper Wi-Fi site survey, right? To know what will be the best parameter. And by default, right, the controller will try to use the 80 megahertz if possible. But in the deployment, you know that the AP is quite high density, then 80 megahertz doesn't make sense. So you can go here and you specify what could be the channel width you want to allow the AP to run. So let's say I only allow 20 megahertz maximum. So you can go here and you limit the max channel bandwidth to 20 megahertz. It means that when you do this one, the AP will only use the 20 megahertz. But you know that in the environment, you can turn on 40 megahertz to improve the throughput. Then they can go here and you set the 40 min and 40 max, right? So in this case, I just leave it 20 and 20. Now, min ERP 15 and max ERP 21. Recommendation, the min ERP of 2.4 and max ERP, sorry, the min ERP of 5 GHz radio and max EIRP of 2.4 radio should have 6 dBm gap or 9 dBm gap. So when you do this, it will encourage the client to join to 5 GHz instead of 2.4, right? So I just leave it because it's a lab. I just leave it uh, 15 and 18. So this is could be the recommendation for office environment. Okay, apply the change. All right. So the next step you can assign the LMS, right, which is under here. You can go under here and under AP system. Under AP system, you go down to LMS setting. But in this case, for the lab, we don't need to do this. LMS IP, it could be the IP address you configured for the virtual IP address of VRP IP address of the um, VMC or your MC. One of the recommendation when you configure the AOS8 is that you should turn on the IPM. The IPM feature is help the AP to be able to intelligent adjust the power, right, and turn off the component not required, like USB port or second Ethernet port, if there's not enough power provided by PoE switch. For example, if AP515 If you want to run AP file config on the legacy PoE, it means only support up to 15.4 watt per port. You have to turn on this feature. So the AP will intelligent turn off, like USB port, turn on the second Ethernet port to um, to 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 reserve the power for the Wi-Fi radio, right? All right, so basically we have done the basic configuration, and the next step is that we just need to assign the AP into this AP group. Okay, so to assign the AP to AP group, you can go to here under the cluster, under the access point, and you can assign this AP provision, provision, provision this AP to the LAN. Okay, submit, continue and reboot. So once you've done that, the AP will reboot and it will join to this new um, group, and it will start to broadcast the SSID. Okay, I think we're missing one thing. Let me check if we already configured the high availability. Okay, so one thing we are missing in our step is that we need to configure the cluster, and we need to configure VMC1 and VMC2 VRRP IP. Okay, right. It means this one is for the LMS setting, right? So we need to go here, and under the L2 redundancy, we will create the L2. So we can do it from the folder level. So let's see what could be the IP address we configure here. So as you can see from here, we have the VRP IP.59. This could be the IP we plan to use for LMS, right? Go here and we say this is the 59. Okay, so we name VRP ID is 59, and measurement VRP. IP address 172.25.8.59. Priority just set 100. Um, up VLAN 2908. Okay, that's all. And submit. Deploy the change. So if in case if you want to set the VMC1, it's so-called preferred to be the VRP master, you can go here and set the priority for this one higher, like 100, 100, right? But actually, it's not necessary to do this when you already configure the cluster. Okay. Okay, so while we're waiting for AP to boot up and join back to the controller, we can go back to the controller and do a quick check. SSH to first controller and SSH to second controller. Show VRP, you will notice here. You have the VRP 59, which is just created. This is for LMS, for AP discovery. So it means when you configure AP option 43 and option 60 for the AP to discover the controller, you can use this IP. Okay, so the VRP router, you see this, you see here 220 and 221. This is the COA VRP IP we configured in the previous step under the cluster setting, right? So by default, um, the the VMC1 will be the master of the first IP and will be the standby for the second IP. And VMC2 will be the backup for the first IP and master for the second IP, right? Okay, so you notice that even we set the priority for this guy is 110, but for the VRP 59, it is backup. That's because of we do not turn on the preemption feature. Actually, it's not necessary, so we just leave it there, right? Okay, so we can show AP database to check the AP status. So basically, AP is down for now. It is rebooting, right? So okay, so while waiting for it to complete AP rebooting, we can go to the ClearPass and do our configuration. Now, to go to the ClearPass, we need to log into the publisher. So basically, the IP address of publisher should be 61. It will be 172.25.x, which is your group ID, and 61. In my case, it is x.61. Admin Aruba at 123. Now I need to add, first step, right? I need to configure CPM cluster. Sorry, we restore the CPM cluster initial configuration. So to do that, you can go to here, server configuration, go to here and choose the restore. So when you choose the restore, you can choose the file on, you upload file to the server. So you go to your setting, you will have the file on, the backup file on the desktop, right? So the file will look like this. So in my group, it will be the CPPM1 part 1 completed, right? Restore this one. Okay. All right. So let's move to the next step. Configure CPPM VIP. To configure CPPM VIP, you go to the server configuration under the virtual IP setting. So under here, I will set the virtual IP for the ClearPass. So what could be the IP I should set? You go back to the virtual logical network diagram and look at the ClearPass. So we see the virtual IP will be those 69. We assign 172.25.8.69. Host ID, just leave it default by 1, or you can change it to 69 if you know, if needed, right? Primary node, in this case, I will use CPPM1 as a primary node and CPPM2 as a secondary node. So the primary node will hold this IP address. Means if you point authentication to, if you point the controller to use the 69 as the reader server, then the request will be sent to the primary node, which is the CPPM1. Save. Done. Right, go back, check again. Okay, so it is enabled, right? We can do the ping test to make sure that the IP is enabled and activate now. 25.8.69. Okay, so it is on now. All right. Configure VMC1 and VMC2 as Raiders client. So to do that, you go to Configuration tab here under the Network, Devices, Add. Now, ClearPass have flexibility for you to define how you want to add the controller as a Raiders client. So in this case, I can define each IP address of the VMC. Like I add the 172.25.8.51 and then 8.52 and then 8.59. So instead doing that, I just do this way: 172.25.8.51 to 59, and I can VMC1, VMC2, VMC, VRRP, radius client. Okay, secret radius share secret Aruba at 123. Remember, A is capital. Aruba at 123. Okay. For in this lab, we don't use the takas plus share secret, but we can just configure there. 123. Vendor name is Aruba, right? And this one enable radius dynamic authorization. Aruba, it will run on the port 3799. So we just leave it there by default, and we just add. Sorry, this is the name, so I need to specify IP here, right? So this is my common mistake. I just say VMC IP subnet. Or I just say 172.8.51 to 59 P range. Done. Okay, so move to the next step. What should we do? We create the enforcement profile and enforcement policy via configuration wizard. You can go to here under configuration, services, template, and wizard. So we can go to the full wizard. Click here to go to full wizard, and we choose the Aruba AO2.1X wireless, right? Okay, now what should we do here? We can name it. Um, let me name it Part 2A Use Case 1 A2.1X. All right, I will turn on the authorization if I need to do some authorization, right? Later on, right? And readers Aruba wireless SSID exists. Okay, so we just leave it there. It means that in this condition, it will match all the readers authentication requests come from Aruba Wi-Fi, regardless of ESSID, right? But maybe later on we may need to do some fine tuning to make sure that it only match the you know the SSID we configured for this use case. So this one will be we can do it later, right? Click next. Authentication. So we just leave the IP, PEAP, and IP TOS. This is two common authentication method. We can leave it there. And in the IP PEAP, you can click here to see what are the inner method. So we already have the IP MHAP v2, which is the one we will use later, right? Authentication source. Now in this case, for authentication source, we can just leave it local user repository first and click next. Under authorization, we just leave endpoint and we add endpoint and we add the local user repository. Okay. Click next. Row mapping, leave it blank first, right? Click next. Enforcement, click just leave it blank first, right? Click next. So this will be our um, enforcement policy, enforcement profile, and enforce and our service policy, right? Click save. So let's move this one on top. Save. So we have here. This is our new service policy we configured for use case number 1. Okay, so there will be some fine tuning we should do, right? For example, now for enforcement, under the enforcement, right, we should create a new enforcement policy for this one. So I will just name it. This will be enforcement policy. I add new one. Enforcement policy rule. So for but basically for now we just add the rule which is match any type date date of week belong to Monday to Sunday. So this could be the condition if you want to basically match any, right? It means it is always true. Then under select to add, you just need to add allow access profile first, right? Click save and save. Default. Okay, we need to define the default. So default, we just click choose deny access profile. Okay, save. So once you save, then you can choose this profile, this enforcement policy to use in your service. All right, so we already have the enforcement policy. Go to the role mapping, right? So basically for the role mapping, we will not use for now, but later we can do some testing, right? Authorization. Okay, so it is ready for us to do a test for this. So we go here. My recommendation when you want to do fine tuning for the ClearPass, you can open the second tab, just duplicate And on this step, you just go to monitor under live monitoring and under asset tracker, leave it there to monitor, right? Go to edit. By default, it's only monitor the CPPM1. You can monitor both. And the date you can choose 7 date, right? Save. Okay. All right. So we see someone try to 61 look like it's, it's try to do the TACAS authentication to the ClearPass, but we don't configure any. Um, Basically, we don't allow this one, right? Just leave it there because of this is the this is the CPPM publisher, right? Just ignore this one. Now we can go to the client to do the test, right? But before we do that, we need to make sure that the Wi-Fi IP is up and it's broadcast SSID, right? We go to dashboard and we see wireless LAN channel. Okay, so normally I will go to the command line and do the check. Show wireless LAN ESS. So we go show AP ESSID, right? So we see that the IP is broadcast these two SSID, right? So now we can go to the client and we do this testing. So to go to client, I will RDP to the jump host for the testing. So I will use jump host number 7 here. Reason I don't use jump host number 8 because I don't have the Wi-Fi adapter for that jump host, so I can't do the test. I go to 7, then which is I have the Wi-Fi adapter, then I can do the test. Alright, so I click to here. I right click to this one, open the network, and the first step I need to do is I go to Wi-Fi, manage node network. I need to add the SSID. So GRP8 WPA2 ENT WPA2 and authentication method is PEAP MHRP2 and save. I do the same for the second SSID GRP8 WPA3 ENT. Now, because of our client do not support WPA3, so we just use the WPA2 for testing. And this one of the good thing in WPA3 is that it is backward compatible with a legacy client, which is only support WPA2. Okay, save. All right, so I can go here and I click here, connect. So when I click connect here, I can go back to the ClearPass and do a quick check to see if I receive any authentication request sent from the controller to the ClearPass. So basically I don't see anything at all. So it means something not right. So now for troubleshooting time. Now it asks to key in from the client, it asks to key in the user and password. So in this case, my client already joined to the AD, so I want to use the AD, to use to use ID username as a login username. So I can just use let's say I just key in the any username first for testing. This is testing, right? Then I try to reconnect. I should expect the controller send something to the ClearPass, which is not yet. Right, so I need to go back to this setting and I need to check the status of this one. So for Windows 10, if you want to modify the supplicant configuration, you have to try to connect it first, right? Like do this, and then while it try to connect to this SSID, you go here and choose a status, and under property, sorry, no, detail. This is weird. I supposed to see the supplicant. Okay, so let me check this. Services.msc. If I turn on the wired Wi-Fi supplicant, what's that auto configure? So it's already turned on. Um, I should be able to see the. Okay, let me see a property. No. Status. Diagnostic. No. Okay, so let me try again. Partner lab. Group 7 start. Connect. Status. Okay, I see the wireless property here already. I go to security and I go to advanced setting. It is doing the user authentication, right? And I go to setting here. First, I just uncheck this one because I'm doing the self-sensor on the ClearPass. Click here and choose this one. So it will. So next time when I connect, it will use the default window login for authentication. Okay, okay, okay. All right. So I will try to reconnect again to this SSID. Now this time it will try to use the AD authentication. So if you notice, right, this is the ID authentication, and if you notice that it try to authenticate to the local user, but in local user I don't have this username, right? And I want to use ID to authenticate this user. So to do that, I need to on the ClearPass, right? I have to add under authentication source. I need to add the ID which is already joined as the as the authentication source, and then I can use this one in my uh, service, right? So I can just say that partner lab ID, partner lab type Active Directory. Okay, so now before catch timer, I try to just use 10 seconds. Primary host name. This is the AD detail, right? So it could be 172.25.29.41. Connection no need to be secure. By ID. By ID, you can we can use the account admin at partnerlab.net. So this one I will share later in the slide, right? What could be the account that you should configure here? By password, okay. By DN, you can search the DN. So basically for this one, we will do it. This is group 8, right? So I will just search from this level, right? Okay, so under attribute, so that's all, right? Um, okay, I can add the second kilobytes, second AD as a backup server here, but actually it's not necessary for this, so I just remove it and save. Okay, so I already have the AD partner lab here. Um, okay, so AD partner lab we already have. We will go back to the service, go to here, and under authentication, you can add that one into the list. Move it up. Under authorization, you can add that one under the authorization list, right? Okay, and click save. Done. Now we can try to connect the client one more time. Connect. And now it's connected. It means that authentication, it is authenticated, right? And you see here. Now here we see that it's authenticated successfully via the PEAP and inner method is MHFV2, right? And we can see the detailed input we see here. However, right, like I mentioned, right, this one by default it will hit, it will meet, it will any authentication request come from Aruba Wi-Fi, it will hit this service, which is we not preferred because we have other lab we need to do in the next session. So we need to modify the matching condition to make sure that it will hit the SSID that we do for this use case number one. So go back to this one under input. You notice that for Aruba ESSID for this one, it will contain the group 8 WB2 enterprise, and later on for the second one we will see the W3 enterprise, right? So the keyword we can match here is the ENT. Okay, so under here we can say that and with ENT. Okay, so and then we save. All right, then we try one more time, disconnect and reconnect the client. Make sure that it still work, right? And go back here and check again. So this is second request come in, and yes, it hit, right? Now we do the same to test the WB3 SSID. We go to here, we connect. So it will connect, it will ask for user and password, key in anything here, and click connect. And right click here and choose the status. And to see the wireless property, oh, I need to do it faster. WB3 connect, ABC, okay, connect, right click, status, property, right? Security, setting, uncheck this one, config, check this one. Okay, okay. And run setting is user authentication. Okay, done. Now we can try one more time to connect to this SSID. Connect. It should work this time. Okay, it's connected. And we go here and we verify, right? AAA and ABC is the wrong one. And now this time it should connect to the WA3 enterprise. Yeah, SSID and it's working, right? And let's take a look at what we return to the client. So basically, we just return access profile, right? And if you monitor under the controller, right, you can monitor from this dashboard. Click here, see client. You see the row is WP3. So actually, this row is the default row we configure under AAA profile. But in the case you want to return a different row, then you always can configure. You can always configure under the ClearPass to return the correct row. So to do that, so-called fine tuning, let's try this, right? So I go here and I will modify the AAA configuration. Now, all the authentication, AAA profile, W2. So instead now I use this default row, I just use authenticated row, right? And I go to do the same for this WP3, I use authenticated row. It means that for now, if the ClearPass do not return any row, user will get authenticated if they connect to WP2 or WP3, right? So let's double confirm that. Connect to this WP2 enterprise. Okay, connected, right? And let's see the ClearPass what is returned to that. So you notice it just return allow access profile. It means that this is just a radius access accept message returned back to the controller without any row at all. So when it do that, right, go to the controller. If you go to the client, if you notice that now the row is authenticated, right? So if you connect to the second SSID, WP3 Enterprise, you see the same behavior. The client only you you only see it is authenticated even the client connect to the different SSID. So sometimes this is not the preferred behavior if because you want to do some row-based access control, right? Um, so you see that it's just authenticated and we connect to W3 Enterprise. Now, how can we enhance this security by doing the role-based access control without statically configure on the controller, of course, right? So we will go here and we just create the enforcement policy. I will name it. It is we choose a template called Aruba Readers Enforcement, and I choose the role I call GRP8, right? GRP8, ENT2, ENT, uh, sorry, WPA2, ENT row, right? I also need to check on the Wi-Fi. I have to make sure that I return the correct row. So it's under the LAN, under the row and policy, right? So I use all capital here. So under configuration, I need to use a capital to the row also. Attribute, you see here, under this template, you just need to enter the row you want to return. Save, done, right? So we search for ENT. This is a row we configure for this enforcement profile to return the row GRPA WB2 enterprise. So I copy this one and I do the second row WBA3 enterprise. Under attribute, I return the WA3 enterprise and save. Okay, so I have two enforcement profile already. Then I can go to this one, right, to do the enforcement. But now I need to make sure that when the user connect to WBA2 enterprise, then I return the WB2 enterprise row. To do that, I will do the row mapping. I create the new row mapping. Right, I will name it, you know, part 2A use case 1 row mapping. Okay, so default row will be other mapping rule. So down here for the row mapping, I will choose a condition is the select all matches, right? Now click add. So to do that, right, I need to go back to the access tracker because I want to match the SSID as a condition to do the row mapping. So go here, you see that. So the one I need to match is this attribute, right? And the value is this one. So I go here, one step, right? Before I do this, I need to create the row, which is the label on the ClearPass, right? So I just go here under the identity, go to the row. Now I just create the row called GRP8 WPA2ENT, right? So the row you create under the ClearPass is for local significant. This row is for ClearPass itself using in the row mapping logic, right? GRP8 WPA3ENT. I can use any name I want, but I want to use some name, significant, um, meaningful, right? Let's go to row, add the new row mapping, other, row mapping rule, select all matches, add rule. Now we know that all condition to match, right? Now we know that the condition we need to match is this one. So we choose the radius Aruba, right? Radius Aruba. The attribute you need to match is Aruba ESSID name. ESSID name. You can choose equal, right? So we do exact match. This is attributed by 3 value is so if it's have this value, then we will return. Then we assign the row name called group 8 enterprise, right? We add another one. You can add another one like this one, right? But in 6 and in 6.9, we can do this one, copy rule. And then you can edit rule faster, right? So down here, we just say WPA2 enterprise, and the label will be, the row will be WPA2 enterprise. Okay, so that is a matching condition, right? And we choose this one under our row mapping. And that's all, right? Save. Now let's do one more time testing. Now to do this testing, I don't need to go and disconnect and reconnect. I can just do the COA to try to disconnect the user, right? So when I issue this one, the ClearPass will start to do the COA to ask the controller to disconnect the user. So when the ClearPass disconnect the user, it will have the user will reconnect and will reorg, right? So in this case, you notice that it have this row, right? And because it have this row, oh, sorry, it still return the same one. So we need to do one more step. So we have the correct row already, but under the enforcement profile, we need to do correct one, right? So we just add rule. We say that tips, if it have the row name WB2, um, sorry, equal WB2 enterprise, if it has this row, then we will enforce this enforcement profile, right? Move up, copy this rule, and this one is the second policy. We say that if it has this row called WA3 enterprise, right, then we will enforce this WPA3 enterprise row. All right, so basically this is how we do the policy, right? So remember these two policies need to be moved on top of the default row. If not, it will always hit the default row. Click save. Now try one more time. Issue the COA to force the client to disconnect and reconnect. We will see the new authentication request come in. Now we have the correct row, WB3, and we use the correct enforcement profile. If we look at the output, right, we see that the ClearPass will return this attribute called Aruba user row, and this is a value. So when we do this, right, when ClearPass do this, the controller it will apply this row to this user. So now it will not use the authenticated row anymore, but it will use this new row, right? In this case, please make sure that you configure this row under the Wi-Fi, right? So if the ClearPass return a row name, and that row name does not exist on the Wi-Fi, so it will just apply the default row. So let's test the second SSID. Connect. Okay, connected. Go back to the ClearPass. Check the access tracker for this one. We see that now it have the row WB2 enterprise, and the ClearPass return this row. Under this row, it will just return the row name, right? So if you want to see the detail, you can look at this one, right? Okay, so let's go to the Wi-Fi and MM and check. Now look at this client. We see now it's turned to the GRP8 WB2 enterprise. So you can apply this logic, right? To do the apply the role-based access control depends on what are the conditions you want, right? For example, you can say that if the user belong to the particular AD group, then you can you can return a different role or different policy, right? That's what that that can be done, right? Where you apply the when you do the you know AD as a authorization authorization source, right? Okay, so that's all for our first lab, and thank you for your watching.